toutes et bonjour à tous. Est-ce que
Good morning. Please take seat. This session is about to start. Thank you. Thank you very much. So welcome, and thank you for being with us. Aliette HOVINE is my name, from France Culture Radio Channel. How to reconcile ecology and employment. This is a theme. There is no question mark. We're just dealing with sort of a burning issue, and possibly we'll look for possible answers. So the topic of the 25th Rencontre d'Aix, dealing with dealing with reality, dealing with the shock of reality. You know, we all face that, especially, for example, we all experiencing a heat wave. We realize that 40% of housing don't have any sun protections, and most large cities actually are not suited to this global warming. Yet to deal with such a heat wave, we need to renovate, think differently. So we need jobs and employment. So we are going to explore this, discuss this. So let me give the introduction in alphabetic order. Sophie, BINET, Secretary General of the Confédération générale du Travail, CGT, the French trade union. Mr. FARANDOU, your Director General of French Railway. Marc, Minister in charge of Industry and Energy. And TONDELIER, at the end of the line, the National Secretary of the Green Party in France. It used to be called Europe Ecologie Les Verts, and now it's called the Ecologistes. All of you in the room, there will be at the end of the session 10 minutes for a Q&A session, so you will be able to ask questions. And I do insist on the notion of questions and not comment. We have limited time, so that please keep your comments for the cocktails or coffee breaks, and just ask clear and short questions. So, further now, to kick off the discussion, I'll give the floor to Katheline SCHUBERT. She's member of the High Council for Climate and member of the Cercle économistes. Tell us all about this. An open leads for thinking. Good morning. First, ecological transition is a major structural transformation. The same order of magnitude as the globalization of technical progress shocks or impacts. We didn't do well in that respect in France or in the world, because the fossil industry has shaped our industry very deeply. So it is a major change which will have impacts on jobs and employment, and my work is to tell you what the economic literature today says about it. It's purely an empirical issue. Well, why should we think that jobs from ecological transition will be in a larger number or a lesser number than the jobs associated with fossil energy? So it's an empirical question. So the only thing within macroeconomic model that the simulation show that at the macroeconomic level there will be limited effect. Unlike what a lot of people think, this transition is not going to destroy a high number of jobs, neither lead to the creation of thousands of millions of jobs. We've heard a lot of the speeches from the industry about job destruction to oppose transition. From the green side, creation of a huge number of green jobs. In fact, the literature shows neither at the macroeconomic level. Macro. So what you have to bear in mind, though, that there will be changes, deep changes in domains. That is, some domains will indeed lose a lot of jobs, and other domains will gain jobs. This is what we have to pay attention to, because domains that will lose jobs, for example, anything to do with fossil energies, are domains that will, which will necessitate the new training, reconversion of employees, and we have to retrain such employees. And the problem could be at the local level, so within the regions, areas. So what we need to avoid, it would be sort of regions will be populated with population with no jobs. Housing will be completely, lose all its values, and so on and so forth. Even within each domain, we can see there are differences, significant differences. Some companies are doing very well, which have a great electric power mix, highly electrical, therefore they will not feel the impact of transition policies, but within the same domain, some companies will be heavily impacted. So we have to do fine-tuning to do a scrutiny of this and see what's going to happen. So that's for the... So why should there be a massive destruction of jobs, even though we have to pay attention to these changes? Now, if we think that transition is going to, for those who think that there will be huge creations of green jobs, well, there is no guarantee. I mean, what the literature says is that we cannot define clearly what is a green job. What is a green job? Well, an accountant who works in an oil company, is he green? Is he not green? Well, we don't know. He's neutral, so it's not quite. It's not a clear-cut definition. So what economists do now, in a more modern approach, they look at the job proposals on the internet using big data, modern technique. They look at what the requests defines, which are the jobs that really need green talents. Someone who will install heat pumps, or clean chemistry in biology, chemical biology or biological chemistry. This is what is being done now. And they realize that, some interesting questions arise. The main one being, do we have the talents? Do we have the skills? Have we been able to train them? Will we be able to train them? That's the first question. Not always, unfortunately, so you clearly have to look at that. And second, are these good jobs? Are they better paid? Are they more skilled? Do they require higher competence? Well, again, in France, we don't see right now any bonus to green jobs. No significant incentives for employees to train or retrain. I'll stop now. Thank you. Well, with this scientific and literature observation, it will fuel questions. So now, Marine Tondelier, let's start with you. Katheline SCHUBERT set the stage of the discussion. Is there an opposition between the green and the industry, that for some there would be an amazing opportunity created because of new demand, new jobs, new employment, and industry which will have to change, to transform itself because it will no longer be suited to the new environmental standards? So between threats and opportunities, where do you see this ecological transition will create new jobs, public and private jobs. It's an opportunity for companies which, but in all the discussions I've had since yesterday, was one of the fear of the fear of the government that is pulling out, or sort of reducing the ecology. But in fact, business managers often understand the ecology better than politicians. China is already a major competitor there. If France does not go for ecology, it's going to be crushed. Almost half of the global investment in renewable energy take place in China. China invested in electrical cars, while in France, the European Union, for example, and European Union is sort of softening the directive on companies CRL. China is imposing it to its companies. Well, I'm not promoting the communist, the Chinese Communist Party, but they understood that this is for the good of the country. Each European state would want to attract investors with no coherence at the scale of the Union, and we try to attract the Koreans or the Chinese or for them to come and open factories in Europe. But we should not hide the problems faced by the industry. The last manufacturers of sun power, European sun powers, are actually disappearing. Europe used to produce 75% of the sun power panels. It's only 15% today. It's not because of it's not the fault of the entrepreneurs or the politicians, the politics which have been implemented recently. I said from an ecologist and an economist viewpoint, it's a shame. The renewable energy moratorium, is going to damage all the companies, and when we see the subsidized Chinese and US economy, we have to protect our companies and our jobs because of, for example, have a carbon tax at the border and continue to innovate and do research. We have to rethink commercial policies, our trade policies. When we see the situation with the US and Trump, but China today is a stability. China is a stability zone, and Europe and France has to show that we have to be stable thanks to democracy and to ecological planning. But it means that Europe, thanks to its massive investment, should also create massive green jobs from agriculture, circular economy, and green industry. Yeah, industrial ecology is possible. It is the life insurance of the sector, that of steel, with and we talk about the steel industry and Arcelor and Mr. FARANDOU. To make trains, you need steel, but we should get on the right struggle, and we need solidarity. Otherwise, society will become more and more violent, and we'll create a legal instability. Look at, see how the Elizabeth-born ecological planning is being challenged today. So clearly we need to go and sit around the table and to ignore our differences and the preconceived ideas. So just to tell you that you're showing two alternatives. There is a third one, the status quo, no transition or not more than today. And in view of the disastrous political news, well, we should have less. It's likely to be less. Well, we all think we go fast, but the news in the last few days. So we want to reintroduce prohibited substances in the atmosphere. So anyway, Madame is reading the text at full speed, so I'm doing my best. So now if we look at the period between 60 and 90 and today, the number of days of heat waves, which has been multiplied by 6, with the fires, wildfires now have been multiplied by 2, dryness of soil increased by 50%, and the cereal yield have dropped by 40%, and there is also the problem of clay swelling, which is causing a lot of problem now, and it's now almost 70% of the. Okay, I will spare you all the details, says Madame. Good. So we want to. We can't avoid the situation. There is no transition. It's a threat. Every degree of global warming leads to a drop of 12% of the global GDP, and if we take the global warming, that would be a 25% loss of GDP at the global level. So we can see climate warming, global warming is here, and will have a negative impact on the economy. What is the role of and I'll conclude. We need a clear heading. We have to be coherent and forecast. And today we don't have clear incentives. If I were a manager, business manager today, will I invest for the 10, 20, the next 20 years? I wouldn't know where to go. We got this surprise parliament crisis anyway. The problem, the last government of Emmanuel Macron undo what the first government did. So there are laws today which come as we don't even know what's going. Clearly we have a legal chaos. So ecological transition is not an option. So what transition do we want? Do we want something imposed by drought, temperature, natural disasters, and do we want to choose our fate? And the Green want to choose their fate. a lot of topics or ideas have been dealt with, that uniformity of standards and laws of France. So France wouldn't be alone. So Sophie BINET, between the trade and opportunity that was put on the table 10 years ago, because the law of August 2015 concerning a relative transition for green growth, and to work with the French partners. So this is what we're going to discuss today, and territorial collectivity. So a plan for programmation of jobs and skills. So what is the position of CGT there, and what is the role of CGT when it comes to the environment? How do you address this between ecology and employment? Well, to start, first, good morning. To start with your last question first, the environmental question is central, because they were, you know, the employees are the first to pay the bill. Just in 1 week, with this heat wave we experienced, there were 3 people who died at work. So the heat will kills people. So there is no anticipation of the environmental issue. We pay for the bill. We pay the bill. Recent example, Yara makes fertilizers. For years and years they were violating the anti-pollution laws. Environmental Association won the case to a court, and this company has been sentenced. Well, what's the result? Well, the company announced that it will shut down, and it's moving its production. In the owner is Swedish, and we had a project to transform the production of fertilizers so that will be less polluting, the fertilizer and the process, which has been basically pushed aside. So to come back to this first question of the law 2015, well, law of 2015, well, there is no true planning or programming for concerning the environment and the industry. The sun power issue, for example, is clear. We do not establish a relationship between standards and change of consumption with the upstream and the industrial domain. We develop sun power panels, but we don't work upstream with in the industrial production chain or domain. Let's look at the automotive industry today. No environmental anticipation strategy has been prepared. So it's a double sentence for workers. First, massive layoff, because now it's less 100,000 jobs in the automotive industry because of the environmental transformation, but this is linked to the offshoring and the margin policy. And since the constructors' strategy is to have cars which are more expensive to better margin and more dividend, well, the consumers can then buy good or cheap electrical cars, and therefore we do have now zones. There are urban zones in France which are, you know, so again, once again, there is chaos and total lack of coherence in French politics when it comes to the green industry. So manufacturers are building electrical an affordable electrical car in France. They have a sort of electrical car which is sold 15,000. So what Nissan is doing in Japan, Renault cannot do it in France. So we need to impose the production in France with the conditionality of public support. And last example, heat pumps. The heat pumps is a key point to renovate our housing, and about a year ago the government adopted a plan to double the production of heat pumps in France. What do we see today? The first production of heat pumps in France, called the Dietrich, which is the oldest French company, created in 1684. The Dietrich said they will stop their production in France to delocalize, and we cannot let them do that. We can see clearly that when we dealing with the climate challenge, we need a true industrial environmental planning to have a real strategy. You know, the laissez-faire is no longer acceptable. It's most interesting. We can see the contradiction, you know, and the word planning that came in the two present talks, when in the heading a line, a capability of anticipation that companies do not necessarily have. Is this for you the role of the state, is to anticipate, to get this framework that goes beyond a form of market rationality? Good morning. Of course, this is the role of the state, and this is the end purpose of what was implemented the last few years. Because green planning, was initiated by Elizabeth Born, but today we got need, because industries, want to have a pluriannual energy growth. And this has been somewhat delayed by the French Parliament. But this anticipation challenge is clearly essential. And I agree with Marine to say that ecological transition is not an option. I will take my cap as Minister of Industry and Energy to focus more on the energy transition. So why is energy transition not an option? So, we want to pull out of dependence from fossil energies, 60% of our energy consumption today, to go towards electrification of utilization, modes of production of energy that would emit less CO2, and to produce less CO2, and to depend less on countries which are hostile countries, like Russia, and also countries who export their hydrocarbons today are not as reliable as they used to be. There is a problem of sovereignty that makes it essential. So there is also something at stake in terms of industrial opportunity. In fact, what comes out of your alternative between threats and opportunity? Well, there are rules which frame the energy transition. They're set at the European level and the French level. At the European level, for example, is the fact that we go to the electrical vehicles in 2035. The fact that we give ourselves the objective to reduce our CO2 emissions at the horizon to 2035-40. So rules are essential and necessary for the electrical vehicles. It's a rule that is often criticized, but the whole automotive industry does not challenge the 2035 objective. What they challenge is the way adaptation are made so to avoid the impact on jobs, to avoid negative impact on jobs. We need to know how to adapt rules. To set a heading for energy transition is necessary. We have to fully agree with that, but we need to find adaptations to prevent automotive industry shut down plants and so on and so forth. So, I mean, this is something that is absolutely mandatory. Although in Europe, we set ourselves climate objectives without clearly assessing the ability of our industry to reach them. And you talk about China. China did exactly the opposite. China built a production, developed, renewable energy, this is where they have the highest development, and now they are gaining results, but they will keep gaining results. As to the origin of emissions, in France, in Europe, we did the opposite. So what we are advocate for in Europe, and what I advocate for as a minister, is to add to the emission reduction objectives. What we want to do, we want to reduce by 90% the CO2 emission versus the 1990 reference. What France says is that we cannot have this kind of objective without first having a very ambitious industrial policy, a less naive trade policy, and a European preference policy. You talked about the sun powers and the heat pumps. Well, in our markets, in our call for tenders, in public call for tenders, we have to privilege players who are industrialists who add value in Europe and in France. So, and if we fulfill all these conditions, we can achieve our objectives, and we will not stop re-industrializing the country, onshoring. And we need flexibility. We need flexibility in other domains of ecological transition, especially to lower the artificial or the imperviousness of soils, but we have to, industry is 4% of the land use. So I think a lot of the project for site investment are blocked by that. So all I'm saying is that let's find flexibility without renouncing the control over solar imperviousness, so that industry can grow in the industry and at the same time could grow without being blocked by this type of systems. And this is why we have an amendment. Today we have a great opportunity to show to the citizens that there are jobs, and in line with what Mrs. Schubert said, when there is a large transition, there are reallocation of jobs. Some are destroyed, some are created. The role of the state is to give a heading. This is the energy pluriannual planning to support players who face difficulty in transition. We support companies in the diversification. A few weeks ago, we announced this. We saved the Bretagne foundry, which has been impacted by electrical vehicles, and we help them in their reconversion to defense industry. This is what we need to do, to have a heading, adjust rules when necessary at the macro level, and act at the micro level in the businesses to preserve jobs and to preserve the employees. Jean-Pierre Farandou, what's good with we talked about the framework, standard support to businesses. You do represent industrialist champion. You're the first jobs recruiter. You created 1,700 jobs created. How do you deal with this imperative, and what's the impact on jobs as you manage them within the companies? To answer the question, can we combine ecology and jobs? Yeah, we do believe in that. So why do we believe in that? First, start with ecology. Ecological transition, it's one of the 5 strategic lines. So we do believe that this is good for the business today. So how does it take place? Well, the first action, well, it's change the mode of operation. People should take the train more often than other transport. What I'm saying is, okay, you don't agree, it's a reality. So change of mode of transportation, the TGV, I bet you put your hand, but it's a reality, okay? Cars, the same. We don't have many electrical cars. Well, trucks today, pollute more than trains. It's a reality. So first action, you change the mode of transportation. We have to convince people, but take the train. Have a program. So we need multiply by 2 if we can develop, railway transport in this country. There will be more the train drivers, maintenance staff, and so on and so forth. So our job is strongly, contributes to ecological transition. If we do our job properly, well, it's a first answer. So we don't stop there, of course. Circular economy, where we talked about that, we recycle the rails, the ballast. We do recycle the work clothing. So today, France produces linen, especially in Normandy, and it goes to Turkey too, and so we've decided that we're pushing this. We want our work clothes rather than be cotton, which customers we'll do them with French linen, which is that jobs for us that will not go somewhere else. Third, everything biodiversity. We didn't talk about biodiversity. We're the only ones. We didn't have to, but I didn't make the decision, so I'm okay. When I joined in 2017, 2019, we stopped using glyphosate. It does cost us a lot of money. Glyphosate was, great, bloody efficient. The Roundup. It would burn the vegetation. But okay, we said no, stop. We stopped for biodiversity. So now we have more human action. We got people now who do, weed cleaning, and the gardeners of the railways. Those are new jobs. We created jobs there. And CNS renewable. We decided to produce energy. Well, the fact that we will equip you know, the sun power, that's a true topic. So we decided to go and produce electricity. This production of electricity, which will be added to our action, is jobs.
We have a lot of examples that show, yes, moving forward in ecology, yes, moving forward with sustainable transport, that is consistent and it leads to job growth. That's what the professor opened the session said. It's not significant quantities so far, but it still counts. Maintenance on the lines, we have hydrologist engineers working with us because we need to drain the water that's falling on our infrastructure. We have meteorologists working with us now. We can forecast the impact. We can see the impact of heat on the rail 5 to 6 days early, so that allows us to take reinforced monitoring measures, reducing speed, to put the right people at the right place to get the job done. There's also a quantity of employment. There's the nature of employment also. Railway jobs are great jobs. They have a lot of meaning when they work on mobility and protection of the planet. So people like that, young generations in particular, are happy to work in this type of company. These types of jobs have real content. They're not standard robotized jobs. There's a human feel, human intervention, human appreciation, and all of this counts. And it's also a sector, and I'm turning to the Ministry of Industry who knows this. SNCF is the head of this sector, the railway sector, 300,000 additional jobs. We have big champions, Alstom, Thales, and others. So when the SNCF moves forward, when the railway moves forward, the whole sector moves forward. And this is very good for our trade balance in France. China is a huge competitor for us in terms of rolling stock. They have a very high-performance company, and thank goodness we're protected from this. Otherwise, it would be a real concern. So there are questions of sovereignty that come into play. That's just an example. But our ability to integrate industry and ecology could be a great image for our country, our continent. So we must accelerate with this. It's a way of reconciling many issues. There's employment, and behind employment, there's the company economic performance, the customers, our competitive advantage, and also the meaning of work. Where is work going? And allowing work to make it possible to live better together on our planet. Thank you. So I'm going to move forward in the debate. What we heard and what you said was very interesting. You said we're the only ones to have done this, to show an example. So it shows that there's goodwill on your behalf. So the question that I'm going to ask to our three other speakers is, how do we go beyond the framework of goodwill? How can we create be exemplary, create new standards? Marine Tondelier, when a company doesn't necessarily have this role to embody an example, how can you encourage them to do so? What mechanisms can change the deal when the economic framework is not very rational because you're spending money on things that you might not get a clear return on to begin with? I think politicians are here to share a vision, a horizon, and to negotiate with the different stakeholders to talk about the way to get there. We're not going to mobilize companies without guaranteeing a sustainable model. And we don't want to destroy employment. We need a productive tool in France. And I'm not going to say that everything goes through constraints or limitations. So we need objectives and a calendar, and that's what the Green Party proposed for the transformation of mobility, for electrical cars, and for home renovation without forbidding landlords from renting buildings that don't reach certain standards. So we have constraints and encouragements. And we know that if we don't respect all this, we won't reach our international commitments. We need to be able to withstand European and global competition. We need to reduce the tax burden that encourages very negative things for the climate. And we need to encourage and develop a green taxation which encourages low emissions. When the rules are clear, everyone can play the game more easily. We cannot put communication above acts. I heard you talk about flexibility. You're being extremely flexible, overly so in your new government measures. And what Mr. FARANDOU said, 100 billion for the trains, that will solve all of our mobility problems, but we're not seeing the money. When Emmanuel Macron says 40,000 schools will be insulated in the next 10 years, he announces this. So I'm in the construction industry, and I think, okay, we're going to have jobs. This year, halfway through the year, 65 schools were renovated. We're announcing 40,000 in 10 years, and in 6 months, we've had 65. At this pace, it'll take 3 centuries to do this job. So I think that politicians today are more worried about making announcements, about showing off, rather than following up their announcements. And this is not the way of managing an industry. Would you like to respond to this, Marc? There's also the case of ArcelorMittal. Are you going to put some money on the table, and for what result? If you're not using strict constraints. I agree that the state is not only there to set a heading, but they have to act. We can act through constraints. The constraints, if they're not accompanied with the necessary loosening over time, at a given time they will be dealing with people rejecting it. We see this in our parliament. So we need to have certain clauses to ensure consistent monitoring of all of our energy programs. We also have other drivers. You talked about taxation. The government is acting on these topics. I have fought that in the finance law for 2025 there be tax measures that encourage companies with tax penalties to electrify their professional fleets. 1 new car out of every 2 in France is bought by a company for their professional fleet, and only 10% of fleets are electrified. That's less than for individual cars bought by households. So we need to encourage companies. We've done it in the past, and it has produced results. We'll be speaking about them soon. So we need to use a variety of tools. There are constraints, but there's also encouragement. Encouragement for investment. We'll talk about the major topics of decarbonization. The state, for many years now, since the Plan France 2030, has been investing considerable amounts of money to accompany the decarbonization of big industrial sites. That's 20% of CO2 emissions in France. Half of these 20%, so 10%, are located in 50 industrial sites. So we put billions of euros on the table to support decarbonization projects with electric furnaces, carbon capture projects, a lot of technological solutions that are constantly evolving and that we need to support with public finance. The state is doing this in a very constraining environment. In 2025, we voted 1.6 billion euros of tax credits to support decarbonization on these industrial sites, and that's the topic of Arcelor. Is it enough to put public money on the table? No, it's not. Arcelor suspended its investment project, its big project, 1.8 billion, where the state committed 850 million to announce a less ambitious project of 1.2 billion, where the state will contribute nevertheless, because there are other conditions for transition and decarbonization to occur. And I'll come back to what I said earlier. The European challenges are essential. Arcelor, like all metallurgy companies, is dealing with the global steel market that's in great difficulty with Chinese steel that's massively subsidized and overproducing, with plants producing only 60 to 70% of capacity. So it's difficult to make investments in these conditions. We have to provide financial support, but we also have to be more astute on a trade level. And in a few days, the European Commission, at the request of France, will come up with import quotas on Chinese steel, and I hope that they'll make announcements on the carbon at the border taxation scheme to make it more effective. These are the necessary conditions to continue on this road to decarbonization. by preserving jobs in France and in Europe, because these jobs in the metallurgy industry are necessary. Our sovereignty depends on it, and our goal, as opposed to what happened in Germany, where ThyssenKrupp sites closed, we want these metallurgy sites to stay open in France, so we need to use a lot of drivers and not just constraints. Thank you very much. Sophie Binet, let's talk about ArcelorMittal. It's an interesting case. There was public funding put on the table. Things were pushed back. Arcelor also had some labor issues. If we look at the cause and effect, how can we constrain while encouraging? I invite the government, the ministers, to stop being naive. Mittal, we're familiar with it. Mittal has been telling lies for years. 20 years ago, they bought Arcelor, promising that they would never close a site and they would never fire anyone. And we know the results. They've closed half of the sites. And I hear that the state is going to sign another check to Mittal for their investments. But what are their investments? It's half of the initial plan, which means that 1 out of every 2 furnaces will be closed in Dunkirk. And these investments involve the redistribution of investments that have been planned for other French sites. So yes, we need other measures in order to protect European steel. And for this, the European Commission will announce them and will meet all of the demands of Mittal. But we need to take the control over the European steel sector. Europe was built on the European community of coal and steel because it's a central question for us. And what we know, and that's why the CGT has been talking about this for months, Mittal is organizing and preparing a plan to leave Europe and to relocate its production capacities to India and Brazil. They're not doing it right now because they haven't yet decarbonized their production in India and Brazil. They're doing this in 2030. If we allow them to do that, that's what they're organizing, and that's why they're making minimum investments in Europe. And I'm shocked to hear that the government is going to give them another check while Arcelor is firing 600 people in 25 after having fired 200 in 2024. So the CGT is saying, okay, we've got to put a stop to this. We have to nationalize ArcelorMittal. It won't cost more than the assistance that we're providing them with. We can turn this these subsidies into a stake in the company. And at the European level, we have to work on this. We built Airbus. Why can't we build a European steel giant? Let's stop just giving them subsidies and let's take stakes in these companies to have a strategic interest in them. So you said the topic here is affronting the shock of reality. We have to stop at just saying the same thing over and over. So we've been working with to get rid of the fines from the European Union on automakers before 2035. But in exchange, what are we getting? Automakers are continuing to fire people and to close sites. So we learned a few weeks ago that Ampere, the subsidiary of Renault, working on electric vehicles and that makes electric engines in Clion, and they promised that all of the electric motors for Clio would come out of this site. But we've learned that Renault is organizing the production of part of these motors in China. This is the case for the R5, which was the great pride of the French nation, that finally the R5 would be entirely built in France. So thanks to the employees fighting, we've been able to save some companies like the foundry in Brittany, yes, with the support of the state, but it's not thanks to Renault, because we have to reconvert a part of the plant while the state owns 15% of the capital in Renault and could impose another strategy. So yes, we need constraints because otherwise we will not succeed. Thank you. So we're running out of time. If you have questions, it's the moment. I see hands are being raised. So there's a young woman with an orange top. Hello, everyone. I'm an entrepreneur in responsible digital industry. We talk a lot about going away from fossil fuels to more electrical energy for cars with greater use of batteries. And we know that this is a very extractive economy that's disastrous for human and ecological reasons for the planet. And in my opinion, does not necessarily create sustainable and non-delocalizable employment in France. So my question is, how do we reconcile real ecology for the entire planet and jobs, sustainable jobs in our regions by moving to a more regenerative economy? So we didn't really talk about this question of territory. It's very important. The territories are strongly marked by certain industries and by a historical industrial presence. Would anyone like to talk about this? That's a real question for the environment, but also for reasons of sovereignty. Because if we think at the French scale, we don't have significant extraction capacity, not at the level of other countries, even if we have some resources. And as the Ministry of Industry a few months ago, I launched a mine inventory on our country to assess our potential in terms of rare earth metal extraction. But it's true what you said, we need to recycle and we need to structure our recycling field. We have an industrial base for recycling. We need to create this. It's not simple. We have battery recycling plants that are being developed. There's some projects that were stopped because the automobile market and the entrance for batteries are not in the best condition right now. But it's very necessary to work on recycling in order to protect the environment, but also because we don't want to depend on countries like China that have a monopoly on rare earth metals, metals that are necessary for the production of components to make semiconductors and batteries, and in many breakthrough industries. And this is why we launched a project in the southwest with Carester to refine large quantities of rare earth metals and to regain sovereignty on these processes. I know I'm not answering your angle or in lining up with you, but I think we need to look at both aspects of this. We need to look at refining and we need to look at recycling. There's a young man who's had his hand up for quite some time. That's an excellent performance. Thank you. My name is Robin Lardot. I'm a student, an aspiring journalist, and member of the youth jury this year. Yesterday, there were a lot of newspapers that focused on it. This is their headline: planes, trains, not the same level of weapons. And I think that's true. So we're not taxing jet fuel, and people are continuing to fly between Paris and Lyon, Paris and Marseille, when we have excellent TGVs. The Paris-Lyon line is the most profitable. Why are we continuing to allow flights on this line? We talk about transition and the economy. Why are we continuing to do this, to allow this? I'd like to say something. Intra-European flights are subject to the emissions negotiations. It's the ones outside of Europe that are not taxed. The intra-European flights are taxed. I don't decide on tax policy in France, so I can't go into this. I think that a modal approach does not require opposing the train and the plane. You can't take a train to go to New Delhi, but you could take the train to Aix-en-Provence, I agree. So really, there's a natural distribution of transport modes according to the distances that you need to travel, and each mode has to work on depolluting. The train is a little bit ahead, but we're not finished yet. We still have to work on this. Our battle, if we had to look for new taxation, is for the our railway system, we're currently negotiating this with the French government. We need an additional €1 billion for 2028. It's vital if we want to maintain our railway network and we want to pass it on to our children and grandchildren. So if there's a bit of taxation to help us, we agree to that. Sophie BINET? I don't agree. There won't be a natural distribution of transport modes. There's a question of redistribution and the correct price for transport. Air travel is not participating in the financing of infrastructure, similarly for road transport. So you're talking about modal exchange, but it's going in the wrong way. We're tipping from trains to road and even from the train to the plane, particularly for railway freight. What's happening is a disaster. France was already trailing behind Europe. In Germany, it's 18% of merchandise transport by train. In France, it's 9%, and it's going down. And what are we doing? We're dismantling our historic operator, Fret SNCF. Fret SNCF is obliged to give up 30% of its market share to its competitors. The Perpignan-Régis train has been stopped, even though we fought to keep it open. So hundreds of additional trucks on the roads because of this. And there's a problem of investment in our railway system. We need to finance it with the right price for transport, and that has not been set up. And the problem of air transport today is low-cost travel. There's been an explosion that is subsidized by public funds because they often benefit from tax credits, and they can organize themselves to for dumping policy. There's a man in the second row who raised his hand early, and I think that's the last question we can take. So we're focused on renewable energies and digital. How, in the sector of infrastructure, which has a very long-term horizon that we cannot challenge every year, compared to other countries that control all of their fields, they have a very long-term vision, 10 years and more, that is never challenged, not challenged every 3 years or every 3 months or every year. So how can we have a national movement for energy transition and these transport questions? We talked about Ma Prime Rénov' that's been eliminated. So there are things that are changing quickly and all the time. So how can we manage this? We come on the question of heading, which we brought up earlier. Setting a heading means defining rules that are as the least constraining as possible and the most encouraging possible. This is like our multi-annual plan for energy. In energy transition, in the field of energy, renewable energies and nuclear energy, geothermal energy and electricity, there are a lot of stakeholders that have investment projects that have been suspended. Suspended because the heading is not clear today. It's not on the table. We have a multi-annual plan that goes back to 2020, and we're still planning on closing 14 nuclear reactors. We need to update this plan. We have a multi-annual scheduling that does not give the place that is required to renewable energies. We need to update this according to needs. There's a question of political stability, and this explains the zigzags on this path. I say, on behalf of the government, that we want a multi-annual planning to give a real clear heading to all the companies working in energy for the 5 or maybe 10 coming years. But of course, the spirit of responsibility must be present. We want to publish this law in the coming weeks and months, and we all have to behave in a responsible way in the political field. So we talked a lot about big industrial champions, big companies, but there are also SMEs. So that's caused a lot of removing this energy recovery subsidy has been problematic for small companies. You say there's political instability, but we have the president of our republic who's 12 years, and he's contradicting himself constantly. You start with make the planet great again, and we're finishing with French Trumpism. And I have a problem with clarity, with understanding. I don't know where these people are heading. We are having a heat wave right now, and in 2 days, everyone's green again. Gérald Darmanin talked about the ecology on Twitter. I don't understand anything anymore, and I'm worried it's not clear. On My Prime Rénov', I'm tired in this country that some people are credible and some are not credible. When we go to Bercy, we've seen a decrease in the Green Fund, the third drop in My Prime Rénov'. We need to insulate homes. It seems obvious. But we're told, the Green Party, you haven't understood. We've got figures in Bercy, you don't understand. There won't be an impact for the French people because My Prime Rénov' has such underused funds. We'll drop the budget, but it won't have an impact on the French people. They look at that and they tell us that. 6 months later, they're suspending it, this reconversion bonus. So we can't work this way. And when I hear about punitive ecology, let me just remind you that all of this assistance was direct assistance to the French people to protect their purchasing power, so I don't understand what's happening. Thank you. I just have to answer. I know we've gone over our time. We talked about French Trumpism, about a president who's supporting renewable energies while Donald Trump has cut off all support to renewable energies. I talked about respecting science, etc. But the basic problem is that the laissez-faire that the minister is proposing is the choice of inconsistency. Let me give you an example. We're talking about zero artificialization of the ground, but we're leaving a chemical plant to close. Last week, we gave you the new CGT project to take over this activity at Vincorex at the chemical platform. We need an answer. We need the state to act. I'll give you my answer right away. Because I was at Vincorex last week and I met the project developers, and our aim is to revitalize the site when there are closures. That's what we worked on with the elected officials. This is the method that we're going to continue with. Thank you. That's the end of our debate. Thank you, everyone.